Welcome to the Clovis Church of Christ Sermon Podcast. Thank you for listening.
All right, we are in the Gospel of Matthew. Now, we might have a few more things to say on the review today because last week the recorder wasn't here. And so we want to kind of sum up just briefly some of the things that we talked about last week. Now, in the Gospel of Matthew, of course, we have our outline. We remember how we are approaching this book. I say we remember. By the time we finish in here, maybe we will remember. We tried to reduce it to 5 sections, and that may turn out to be a little bit awkward, but for memory purposes, that's the way we want to do it. And we've also noted that the Gospel of Matthew has a particularly Jewish slant to it. And these are the reasons we say that. Matthew writes of things that would be of concern to a Jew, like the genealogy of Jesus. We have a large number of Old Testament quotations in Matthew, and we have some unexplained things that a Jew would just naturally know and would not need an explanation. Now, as far as the details that we have looked over so far, we're only in the 2nd chapter. So we really haven't looked at that much. We looked at the genealogy and we've linked that to Joseph, and we've talked about how important Joseph would be in the mind of a Jew. You want to start out by connecting the lineage of Jesus back to Abraham and David, because that's kind of the first cut in a Jew's mind concerning whether or not Jesus of Nazareth could be the Messiah. Now, last week we got into the story of his birth and the visit of the Magi. And since it wasn't recorded last week, if somebody's listening now to this thinking, oh, maybe last week they answered all the questions about who the Magi were. Did we? Not definitively. And maybe they're asking questions concerning the star. And can you give definite answers concerning the star? No. There's just some things that we can say. We can say that Magi probably represents a caste of people that were common in the East. Maybe some that had gotten in contact with Jews of the dispersion, had learned something concerning Jewish ideas of the Messiah. Now that seems to be a possibility. The star itself did not behave like a normal star. It led them and stopped on the house. Stars don't behave that way. Comets don't behave that way. So this is act of God kind of stuff. And this is what we were discussing last week. And it took us a whole hour to talk about that. Now, most of what we have concentrated on thus far in the class has been Matthew's use of prophecy. Hebrews 1 and verse 1. God spoke to the prophets in many portions in divers ways. Many portions, piece at a time, a little bit here, a little bit there. Many ways, by the word of the Lord, by dreams, by angels. When we talk about Old Testament prophecy, it can get a little more complex than we thought. Sometimes we tend to think of prophecy as God said something just crystal clear. And it's easy to see, it's easy to trace. Not always that way. There are differences in prophecies, many portions, many ways. Now, thus far, if we chart prophecy in the Gospel of Matthew, the 2 prophecies that have been quoted up to this point, Isaiah 7, Micah chapter 5, to a believer in Jesus, they're crystal clear. Yeah, Isaiah was talking about the virgin birth, talking about a great child, and there were other passages in Isaiah that talked about the child. The 9th chapter, the 11th chapter, the 52nd and 53rd chapter, Micah. And Micah also talked about the child that would be born in Bethlehem. So thus far in the Gospel of Matthew, his use of prophecy to us, oh yeah, that's crystal clear. But now we get into something a little bit different. Let's turn to Matthew 2 and verse 12. And having been warned by God in a dream not to return to Herod, the Magi left for their own country by another way. God warns the Magi to go home a different way because Herod is on the hunt for the baby or for Jesus. And that brings us to a couple of prophecies that are a little bit nebulous compared to these two. And when I say nebulous, we mean a little bit cloudy. And this is rhetorical, but think of it anyway. Have you ever been in a conversation with somebody and they were hinting things to you? They were dropping hints concerning something they were going to do or what was going to happen. Was it always easy to figure out what they were getting at?
Those of us that are married are very familiar with that.
Say that one more time.
Those of us that are married are very familiar with that.
Yeah. When we talk about dropping hints to people, sometimes it's difficult. And then what they were hinting at happens and it's, oh, now I get it. You know, you dropped a hint, but you didn't say it in a crystal clear manner. Sometimes when you look at Old Testament prophecy, it almost appears to be more of a hint than a clear, direct statement. Let's read verses 13 through 15. Steve, would you read that, please?
13 through 15. Matthew 2.
Matthew 2, verses 13 through 15.
Now when they had gone, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, Get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is going to search for the child to destroy him. So Joseph got up and took the child and his mother while it was still night, and left for Egypt. He remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet. Out of Egypt I called my son.
Okay, the subject matter is going to be Hosea 11 and verse 1. A prophecy which says, out of Egypt I have called my son. Now, one thing I do want to notice about this, did Joseph seem to have any inclination to go to Egypt at this time? He wasn't going to Egypt. Why'd he go? God told him to. So God set this thing up, didn't he? God is actually causing this thing to happen. Just, okay, you're going to go down to Egypt, and he goes down to Egypt. Keep in mind that God is the moving force behind this. It isn't just a forecast that we're talking about in Hosea 11. It's something that God is going to bring about and cause to happen. Now, in the 15th verse, he remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, out of Egypt I've called my son. Hosea 11 and verse 1. Put a marker in Matthew 2 and turn to Hosea 11. And this isn't a warning, this is an encouragement. You can spend a lot of time looking at messianic prophecy, particularly in the Old Testament. I'm sure you all have been in congregations where you've heard people express opinions as to why should we look at the Old Testament? We're under the New Testament, so let's just kind of forget that because it's not that important. That's ignorance. That is just, I don't want to look at things that I should be willing to look at. Because if I don't look at these things, I will not come to an understanding of how the prophets use these terms, and I probably won't understand how the New Testament writers are using the terms either. Now, in Hosea, in verses 11 and verse 1, when Israel was a youth, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. When Israel was a youth, I called him, and out of Egypt I called my son. Who's Hosea talking about? Nation of Israel. Now, why should Hosea call Israel God's son? Keep your finger there. Everybody turn back to Exodus chapter 5. Exodus 5, verses 22 and 23. Then Moses returned to the Lord and said, oh, wait a minute, 4, 22 and 23. I haven't had that written down and missed it. Exodus 4 and verse 22. Then you shall say to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord, Israel is my son, my firstborn. You go tell this to Pharaoh. Israel is my son, and we'll just put firstborn in there because that's another connection that we're not even going to get into. God says, Israel, nation of Israel, that's my son. I'm calling them out of Egypt. Years later, the prophet Hosea said, when Israel was a youth, I loved them and called my son out of Egypt. A reference to bringing the nation of Israel out of the land of Egypt. Well, didn't Matthew know that? Didn't Matthew understand that when the prophet Hosea said that Israel was the one under consideration? Did Matthew take that and misapply it? Oh, that's not talking about Israel, that's talking about Jesus. Can it get a little confusing sometimes? All right, here's a concept. Foreshadow. Now, here's something that should be obvious. Yeah, Matthew understood Hosea 11 and verse 1. And he's going to take it and use it in a way that's going to enlighten us a little bit. Now, if we talk about a foreshadow, what is a foreshadow? Somebody give me a good definition, or a mediocre definition. Something that'll work. A definition of a foreshadow.
An image that precedes the substance.
Say that a little louder.
An image that precedes the substance.
Yeah, that's a good one, actually. An image that precedes the substance. If we put it into Okie a little bit, something, an event or a word that points ahead to something that's going to be like it. Two things that are similar. An image that precedes the substance. Good technical definition of it. A minute ago, I talked about hints. You can kind of bring in the concept of dropping a hint. And when you talk about foreshadows, you're talking about two events that are similar to each other, and there's a little bit of the blurring of the lines concerning what is under consideration. For instance, if we look at foreshadows in the Old Testament and try to get a handle on how common they are, think about the Day of Atonement in the book of Leviticus. When God set up the Day of Atonement, once a year you're going to come in and you're going to do a sacrifice, even though you've been doing them all year, and you're going to take 2 goats, and one of them you're going to say, okay, sin on this one, and this one you're going to send off into the wilderness. Was that supposed to point ahead to something in the future? According to the Hebrew writer, it was. You got these concepts that are being carried out. You got an image, sin being taken away, but sin still being there and needing to be taken away. You got the Day of Atonement, the sacrifice of Isaac. How can you read the sacrifice of Isaac when Abram puts him on the altar and ready to kill him? and not see something else? What do you see?
God sacrificing Jesus.
You see God sacrificing his son. Now, there's nothing in the New Testament that comes out and says that God had Jesus in mind when that event occurred. But how do you know he did? Because at the same time, he tells Abram, in you, because of this, in you, all families of the earth will be blessed. So you know, in God's mind, are these events connected? Have to be. In the Day of Atonement, was God thinking about how Jesus was coming in the future? Yeah, Hebrew writer says so. The sacrifice of Isaac, the text itself lets you know messianic overtones that are involved in that. Here's one. You probably thought about this. Moses coming down. Coming down from what?
From the presence of God.
Pardon me?
From the presence of God.
He goes up on Mount Sinai. Presence of God comes back down to the people. Moses later is going to say, God's going to raise up a prophet like unto me. Him you'll hear. You think of the similarities between Moses and Jesus. Presence of God coming back down to the people, going up again later on. And by the way, the coming down, something else. Moses started out being raised in whose palace? He's rich and he becomes poor so that we through his poverty, that's Moses is rich, he becomes poor to help Israel. Jesus, though he was rich in heaven, he became poor that we through his poverty might become rich. Some of these things that when you look at the patterns and the way they lay out in the Old Testament, you just almost come to the conclusion, you know what, those Jews who made a lot more references than we did, a lot more connections, they were probably right about a lot of them. Now, some things you can imagine and overstate your case, but some of the similarities that you get to looking at are just pretty incredible. One of the favorites from the Tuesday class, the miracles of Elijah and Elisha. How many miracles did Elijah and Elisha do that Jesus came along later and did the same thing? Raising the dead, pouring out the oil and just kept pouring it and kept pouring it and kept pouring it. You just follow the narrative, and what they are going to do, Jesus is going to do. David, talking to Steve about this last week. Steve likes the story of David and Goliath. So do I. Is there a connection you can make between the work of Jesus and David and Goliath? The unconquerable enemy. The enemy that no man can bring down. Did David? Yeah. Who's the unconquerable enemy that Jesus conquered? Conquered death. The one I think of with David, though, is from Psalm 41, where my old familiar friend in whom I trusted lifted up his heel against me. David was talking about who? Probably Absalom would be my guess, or Ahithophel, those guys. In Jesus' case, who is it? Judas Iscariot. Matter of fact, the whole life of David. Sit down sometime and make a little chart. Similarities between the life of David and the life of Jesus. The way they started, what they rose to, what they did, how they overcame, the people that rose up against them. In Jeremiah 23, matter of fact, several times in Jeremiah, it talks about he shall raise up David, their king. Jesus is called David. Now the question is, why? Is he raising David from the dead? No. parallel lives. One is a foreshadow of the other. And when you sit down and you start thinking about the parallels between Jesus and David, you'll come up with a whole lot more than you think you can. To me, the one that's tremendously interesting, flip over to Zechariah for a second. And a lot of these things really aren't even pointed out in the New Testament. It's almost as if you got a book set up where God said, I'm going to make some of these things clear so they'll believe the book, and I'm going to see how many of them take the trouble to go see all the parallels that are there. This last one, that Joshua that we're looking at, that's not Joshua that led them into Israel. That's Joshua the high priest in the book of Zechariah. In Zechariah 3 and verse 8, now listen, Joshua the high priest, you and your friends who are sitting in front of you. Indeed, they are men who are a symbol. For behold, I'm going to bring in my servant, the branch. Joshua, you're the high priest. You guys are a symbol. What do you mean by symbol? Foreshadow. You stand for something. You are the image of the substance that's going to come. Now, the branch. Now, if you know the Old Testament, who's the branch? Branch is Jesus. Now, here's the funny part to me. Joshua wants you guys to understand you're a symbol. You're a foreshadow for the branch. And later on in the 6th chapter, the branch will be king and priest at the same time, which nails it as messianic because nobody could be king and priest at the same time but Jesus. But the funny part to me, the name Joshua, that's Hebrew. What's it in Greek? It's Jesus. You talk about things. We talk about the lineage of Jesus. I brought this out in a sermon one time. If you talk about the lineage of Jesus, he would be the seed of the woman, but he would also be Jewish, a descendant of Abraham, of the house, from the tribe of Judah, from the house of David, and finally born of a virgin. And you think, well, if you're going to narrow it down from somebody with a mother to somebody born of a virgin, why don't you just call him by name? Well, he never did call him by name. But what he did do was tell the high priest in the days of Zechariah that you're a symbol for the branch. Didn't even bring out, okay, you got the same name. Now, all these things we're getting at, these are hints, they are forecasts, and a lot of them aren't even spelled out in the New Testament. But they're obvious. Now, when we come back to Hosea, and by the way, think of Edersheim's quote for a moment. We know that the Jews were more into this kind of stuff than we are. At least before the coming of Christ they were. Do you think Matthew sees Hosea as a foreshadow? This was a prophecy in the sense this was a foreshadow. Now, let's go back to Hosea again, if you're not there. Why would it be fitting to say this was a foreshadow? And pretty obvious. Because once upon a time, Israel was the son, the firstborn, and was called out of Egypt. In the mind of God, in Hosea 11 and verse 1, in the mind of God, do you think when he made that statement about calling Israel out of Egypt, that the Messiah was also under consideration? How would you know? Let's go back to Hosea. A couple things I want to look at. Go back to chapter 1. Look at the last verse of each of the first 3 chapters. In chapter 1, we'll start in verse 10. Yet the number of the sons of Israel, which will be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered, and in the place where it is said to them, you are not my people, it will be said to them, you are the sons of the living God. Messianic or not messianic? People, well, actually this is quoted by the Apostle Paul, people who are not the people of God are going to be called sons of the living God. That's bringing into the Gentiles. Look at the end of chapter 2. And verse 23. I will sow her for myself in the land. I will also have compassion on her who had not obtained compassion. I will say to those who are not my people, you are my people, and they will say, you are my God. Messianic or not messianic? Quoted in the New Testament. Chapter 3 and verse 5. Afterward, the sons of Israel will return and seek the Lord their God and David their king, and they will come trembling to the Lord and to his goodness in the last days. Messianic or not messianic? All right. All through Hosea, all the things that are going on, God is dealing with the nation of Israel at that time. He is remembering how that's my son that I called out of Egypt, but Messiah is still in his mind. Now, a question might be, and y'all can check this out, you just have to look at it. In Hosea 11, he starts out in the first verse talking about calling his son out of Egypt. What makes you think that even at this point there are messianic overtones? Because when you go on in the 11th chapter and you come down to verse 8, how can I give you up, O Ephraim? How can I surrender you, O Israel? How can I make you like Admah? How can I treat you like Zeboim? My heart is turned over within me. All my compassions are kindled. I will not execute my fierce anger. I will not destroy Ephraim again, for I am God, not man, the Holy One in your midst. I will not come in wrath. They will walk after the Lord. He will roar like a lion. Indeed, he will roar, and his sons will come trembling from the west. They will come trembling like birds from Egypt, like doves from the land of Assyria, and I will settle them in their houses, declares the Lord. Ephraim surrounds me with lies, and the house of Israel with deceit. Judah is also unruly against God, even against the Holy One who is faithful. Ephraim. Who's Ephraim? Okay. Ephraim is another name for the northern kingdom, the kingdom of Israel. In the days of Hosea, what happened to the northern kingdom? Assyria came and got them. They were no more. Did they ever come back? Northern kingdom ever come back? But when you read verses 8 through 11 talking about Ephraim, does it look like there is hope for Ephraim? They will come trembling like birds from Egypt and like doves from the land of Assyria. That is typical language that is used by the prophets for messianic times when God's people come to him. Now, in other words, we are talking the hope of Israel in the future. They're not coming back, but they will come to Jesus. They do have hope in Christ. Now, remember we started out talking about hints and how sometimes they can be, what do you mean by that? Sometimes when we look at these prophecies, there is a blurring of the lines. It's like two things is going on at the same time, where God did something in the past. He brought his son out of Egypt. Well, he might be doing that again. We're referring to the one, and we're going to use it to say, yeah, that's a hint concerning something to come. That's kind of wrapped up in some of the other things that are said. Complicated, I understand that. but we can find them in the Scripture. Now this one, keep in mind, God made this one happen. If there's a question in your mind about whether or not God had Jesus in mind when he said it, along with Israel, keep in mind in the days of in the days of Jesus, God said, "Get up, go down there, because this is going to be fulfilled." Made it happen. Any comments on that?
Quick question. Verse 2 right there in Hosea 11 switches from singular to plural after saying my son, my child, to as they call them, so they went from them. Who is on they and them?
You're talking about conditions that existed in the days of Hosea. God called them out of Egypt, he established them in the land, and they turned away from him. What Hosea is doing, he's just picking out this term, out of Egypt I called my son. God did it before, God's doing it again. He made it happen again. Now we got one on the board. Now let's go to back to Matthew. I don't know if this next one's even more difficult or less difficult. But in verses 16 through 18, then when Herod saw that he had been tricked by the Magi, he became very enraged and sent and slew all the male children who were in Bethlehem and all its vicinity, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had determined from the Magi. Then what had been spoken through Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and she refused to be comforted because they were no more. Okay, Jesus is in Egypt until the death of Herod. And when we talk about Herod's death, I have a big wonder in my mind concerning Herod's death. The details of his death come from Josephus. According to him, he died at Jericho. And up on the screen, that's Jericho as it is now. That's the ruins of it. That's the Winter Palace. And that one up in the corner, that looks like they've excavated that and took an aerial photo, but it gives you an idea of what the thing would have looked like. It's a Winter Palace. Now, according to Josephus, details of Herod's death, and they're graphic. Sorry, but I think knowing them might help us understand a little bit about what's going on at the time. According to him, at the time of his death, he is eaten up with disease and in just miserable condition. According to him, he has gangrene on his genitals. Now, what does that make you think of? Probably got venereal disease. And that's probably what's killing him. And he's losing his mind. Does that remind you of any famous American figure? Y'all know how Al Capone died? Just like that. He contracted a disease and it ate his mind away. Now, Herod is in miserable condition. He's losing it. He's dying. He's in pain. And he is definitely paranoid, and that might have been the reason for it. And he is doing some things at the time of his death that are just wild. He gives orders to his son-in-law. He says, listen, I want you to gather up, about the time I'm getting ready to die, gather up all the Jewish aristocrats and bring them to the hippodrome. I didn't even know they had a hippodrome. What's a hippodrome? Hippo means horse, believe it or not. Hippopotamus. What's a hippopotamus? It's a river horse. That's what it means. Now, the hippodrome is, I guess, a place where they did horse shows or circus or stuff like that in Jerusalem. But you gather all the Jews, the aristocratic Jews, to the hippodrome, and when I die, you announce that I have died, They probably won't cry. So you kill them all. And there'll be enough weeping in Israel to coincide with my death. Because I want people crying when I die. So I'm going to kill all the aristocrats so there'll be enough crying. That's a crazy guy. Now, he also has his son, Antipater. Antipater was the one that was going to take over for him, but he had two other sons that convinced him that Antipater was out to get him and going to kill him. And so there's back and forth concerning the events. Finally, 5 days before Herod died, he ordered Antipater executed. He killed him. He's doing crazy stuff. Now, what I wonder, if a guy's doing all kinds of baby stuff or crazy stuff, the time of his death, this could all be part of what's going on. Because the dates aren't firm. We know about when he died, and about when he died was a couple of years after Jesus was born. And if you're losing your mind and you're thinking in terms of, I'm going to get anybody that I think is against me. I'm going to get my son because he wants my throne. And those magi never did tell me where that baby was. Possibility that all of this could have come at the same time. Now, this would be a question. Why didn't they write about the killing of the babies? Josephus didn't seem to write about that. Do writers write about the big things or the little things?
They write about whatever suits their narrative. That's usually what the wording works.
If you're Josephus, which is the bigger noteworthy thing to write about? The Hippodrome plan and the death of Antipater, or a few Jewish babies that got murdered? Maybe that doesn't even get any ink. But I kind of think that all this played together, though I don't have a way in the world to prove it. It does make sense to me. Now, this was done to fulfill, a voice was heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and she refused to be comforted because they were no more. That's Jeremiah 31. Let's turn back over there. Let me do some erasing because I might need it. All right, Jeremiah 30 and 31. These are two chapters that go together, all part of the same dream. And historically speaking, this, remember we drew a picture a couple of weeks ago, the way the prophets saw things. If you were Jeremiah looking for the Messiah, you were still going into captivity. He's looking ahead. When he looks ahead to the Messiah, they still have the captivity and the return. So sometimes when the pre-exilic prophets prophesied, you have a hard time differentiating, a blurring of the lines between passages that refer to the return from captivity, the blessings associated with the return from captivity, and the coming of the Messiah. And one of the reasons for that is if you're back here prophesying of future blessings, the return and the Messiah, those are all future blessings. So again, sometimes you'll have a blurring of the lines. Now, if you go back to Jeremiah 30, could you look at chapter 30 and prove that God knew Messiah was coming and was thinking about it, plus the return from captivity? Start in verse 3. For behold, days are coming, declares the Lord, when I restore the fortunes of my people Israel and Judah. The Lord says, I will bring them back to the land that I gave to their forefathers, and they shall possess it. Okay, time's coming when they're going to return. They're going to go into captivity. They're going to return. It's going to be good. Now let's keep going. Let's look at the 9th verse. But then they shall serve the Lord their God and David their king, who I raise up for them. Who's David? Who's David? Jeremiah says it in chapter 23 and verse 8, raise up David their king. David is a symbol for Jesus. Going to raise up David their king. All right, so we have the return. We have Jesus. Let's go to verse 21. Their leader shall be one of them, and their leader shall come forth from their midst, and I will bring him near, and he will approach me. You're going to have a leader that's one of them, and I'm going to bring him near. What's that mean? Who got brought near in the Old Testament? You remember the story of Korah's rebellion? What was that all about? Who got brought near? The priests were the ones that were brought near to God. This is one of those prophecies that talk about king, priest at the same time. This is like Psalm 110. This is like Zechariah 3. So you have a situation, they're going to return, and they're going to have David their king, who's going to be king and priest at the same time. So definitely you have messianic expectations, but you also have the return from captivity under consideration. Things that are related to that, because it's all the future where Jeremiah is concerned. Now let's go to chapter 31. And verse 15. Thus says the Lord, a voice is heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping, Rachel weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children because they are no more. Okay. What's that all about? A voice is heard in Ramah. If you went to chapter 40 and verse 1, what would you find out about Ramah? That's where the Babylonians took all the Jews before they took them into captivity. That was the gathering point for the captives that they were shipping out to Babylon. Rachel, a voice is heard in Ramah. It's like Rachel weeping for her kids. You put this picture in people's mind. Rachel, mother of the nation, there go her kids. And she's crying about it. Very poetic, very graphic. You know, I hadn't even thought about that. Yeah, that's probably why that was brought up. Okay, so Jeremiah 31 and verse 15, a voice is heard in Ramah, Rachel weeping for her children. Well, wait a minute. Matthew says this fulfills the death of the babies in Bethlehem. Well, didn't Matthew know that Jeremiah talked about Ramah? And here we're talking about Bethlehem. Of course he knew it. Those are two completely different places. We're just bringing a correlation together because it's the same kind of thing. Now, Again, foreshadow, hope for the future. We'll pick up there next week. Thank you for tolerating me.
Thanks for listening to the Clovis Church of Christ Sermon Podcast. For more information, please visit us at clovischurchofchrist.org.